The auction hammer fell at $8.2 million, and every billionaire in that Manhattan ballroom turned to stare at the quiet mechanic in oil-stained work boots standing beside his 6-year-old daughter. Lucas Grant had just sold a car he'd bought for $11,000 3 months earlier. A rusted wreck the room's most powerful CEO had publicly mocked him for even touching. But now Giselle Hartwell wasn't laughing. She was watching him with something that looked dangerously close to respect, and Lucas knew his life would never be ordinary again. Want to see how a single father outwitted New York's elite auction world? Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Brooklyn morning smelled like burnt coffee and engine grease, which meant it was Tuesday. Lucas Grant stood in the cramped garage behind his apartment building, elbow deep in the transmission of a 1987 Buick that had been making sounds like a dying cat for the better part of 3 weeks. His hands were black with oil. His lower back ached from sleeping wrong on the couch again. And somewhere upstairs, his daughter was probably eating cereal directly from the box because he'd forgotten to buy bowls at the dollar store. Again, "Daddy, the TV's making the fuzzy noise." Mia's voice drifted down through the open window above the garage. 6 years old, and already she had mastered the particular tone that meant she wasn't asking for help so much as informing him that he'd failed at something basic. "Hit it on the side," Lucas called back, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist and immediately regretting it. Now he had grease on his face too. "I already did. Hit it harder." There was a distant thump, then silence, then the faint sound of cartoon characters screaming at each other in Spanish. Problem solved. Lucas turned back to the Buick's transmission and tried to remember why he'd ever thought buying a garage in one of Brooklyn's shabbier neighborhoods was a good investment. The answer, of course, was that he hadn't thought it was a good investment. He'd thought it was the only option. That was 4 years ago, right after Sarah died and the life insurance money ran out, and Lucas realized he couldn't keep working 70-hour weeks at the engineering firm in Manhattan while also being the kind of father a traumatized little girl needed. So he'd quit. Walked away from the job he'd spent 8 years building, cashed out his pathetic 401k, and bought this garage with its cracked foundation and its tendency to flood whenever it rained hard. His father would have been proud. Robert Grant had spent 40 years working on cars in a shop not much bigger than this one, and he'd always told Lucas that a man who could fix engines would never go hungry. Of course, Robert Grant had also died of a heart attack at 59, so maybe his life advice wasn't as solid as Lucas used to think. "The cereal box is empty," Mia yelled. Lucas closed his eyes. "There's bread. It has the green spots. Cut around them. Ma." Silence. Then, with the kind of diplomatic precision that Lucas both loved and feared, "Mrs. Chen says that's not safe." Mrs. Chen was their next-door neighbor. Mrs. Chen was a 70-something Korean woman who had apparently decided that Lucas was too incompetent to raise a child, alone, and had made it her personal mission to keep Mia alive through sheer force of will and homemade kimchi. Lucas was not too proud to admit she was probably right. "Tell Mrs. Chen I'll buy fresh bread today," he called up. "Tell her I promise." "She says you promised last week too." Lucas did not remember promising that, but he also didn't remember the last time he'd slept more than 5 hours. So Mrs. Chen probably had receipts. He was still trying to figure out how to extract himself from the conversation when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He fished it out with greasy fingers and saw a text from Marcus Webb, who ran the auto body shop 2 blocks down and was the closest thing Lucas had to a friend these days. "You see the auction listing?" Lucas frowned. "What auction?" 3 dots appeared, then Hartwell estate sale. Saturday. "They got a whole warehouse of old cars. Might be something you can flip." Lucas felt something stir in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope, which was an emotion he'd learned not to trust. Flipping cars was how he kept the lights on between repair jobs. Buy something cheap at auction, fix it up, sell it for double. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid for cereal and bread without green spots. Usually. "Send me the link," he texted back. The link came through 10 seconds later. Lucas clicked it and found himself staring at a website that looked like it cost more money to design than his entire garage was worth. Sleek black background, minimalist white text. A logo that was just the letters HH in a font so pretentious it practically sneered at him through the screen. Hartwell Heritage Auctions. curating excellence since 1987. Lucas scrolled down. The auction was this Saturday at some estate in Manhattan. Preview starts at 9. Bidding starts at noon. There were photos of the items up for sale. Antique furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Paintings Lucas didn't recognize but assumed were expensive. Jewelry that sparkled even through his cracked phone screen. And then, at the bottom of the page, almost like an afterthought, automotive collection. Various vintage vehicles in as-is condition. There were only 3 photos. 2 of them showed cars that were clearly out of Lucas's price range. A pristine 1960s Corvette, a Mercedes-Benz that looked like it had never been driven. But the 3rd photo made him stop scrolling. It was a race car. Or it had been once. Now it was just a rusted shell sitting in what looked like a warehouse corner, covered in dust and bird droppings, with flat tires and a cracked windshield and bodywork so damaged Lucas couldn't even tell what color it was supposed to be. The caption underneath read, "Unknown vintage race car. No documentation available. Sold as is for parts or scrap." Lucas zoomed in on the photo. The car's shape was wrong for something modern. Too angular, too raw. The wheels were wide, the stance was low, and even through all the damage, Lucas could see hints of something purposeful in the design. Something that had been built to go fast. His father would have called it a pile of junk. His father would have been right. But Lucas had spent the first 8 years of his career designing suspension systems for race cars, back before life got complicated and dreams got expensive. He knew what purpose-built engineering looked like, even when it was buried under decades of neglect. He stared at the photo for a long time. "Daddy, I'm hungry." "I know, baby," Lucas yelled back, then quieter, to himself. "Me too." Saturday came faster than Lucas wanted, and slower than he could stand. He spent the week finishing the Buick, haggling with the owner over whether a rebuilt transmission really cost as much as Lucas said it did, and trying to calculate whether he could afford to waste a Saturday morning driving into Manhattan on the off chance that the mystery race car might actually be worth something. The answer was no. He definitely couldn't afford it. He went anyway. Mia sat in the passenger seat of his truck, wearing her favorite purple jacket and clutching the stuffed fox she'd named Gerald for reasons she refused to explain. Lucas had tried to leave her with Mrs. Chen, but Mrs. Chen had announced she had Saturday business and shooed them both out of her apartment before Lucas could argue. He suspected the Saturday business was mahjong, but he wasn't about to interrogate a woman who'd kept his daughter fed through multiple bread-related failures. "Where are we going?" Mia asked as Lucas navigated through traffic that felt specifically designed to raise his blood pressure. "To look at a car." "Is it a nice car?" "Probably not." "Then why are we looking at it?" Lucas glanced at her. She was staring out the window with the kind of serious expression she got when she was really thinking about something, which meant she was about to ask a question he didn't have a good answer for. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "things that look like junk are actually valuable. You just have to know what you're looking at." Mia considered this. "Like when you found the quarter in the couch." "Exactly like that, but hopefully more than a quarter." "Mrs. Chen says you're bad with money." Lucas sighed. "Mrs. Chen says a lot of things. She also says you work too hard and don't eat enough vegetables." "Mrs. Chen," Lucas said firmly, "needs to mind her own business." But he made a mental note to buy vegetables. And eat them, possibly. The estate was in the Upper East Side, which Lucas had only ever seen in movies about people whose problems involved which yacht to take to which private island. He parked his truck 3 blocks away because parking in Manhattan costs more than most people's rent, and walked with Mia toward an address that turned out to be a converted warehouse that probably used to store normal things like furniture or plumbing supplies, but now stored the kind of wealth that made Lucas feel like he was trespassing just by existing. The entrance was marked by a simple brass plaque, HH, no other signage. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd walk right past it. Lucas knew what he was looking for. He pulled open the heavy glass door and immediately felt like he'd walked into a different dimension. Everything inside was white. White walls, white floors, white furniture that looked like it would disintegrate if you sat on it. Even the receptionist behind the desk was wearing white. She looked up at Lucas and Mia, and her smile went from professional to frozen in about half a second. Lucas looked down at himself. Oil-stained jacket, jeans with a hole in the knee, work boots that had seen better decades. Mia wasn't much better. Her purple jacket was clean, but it was also 2 sizes too big because he'd bought it on clearance and she was growing into it. They looked exactly like what they were, people who did not belong here. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, in a tone that really meant please leave before you touch something expensive. "I'm here for the auction," Lucas said. "The preview. It said 9 o'clock. The receptionist's eyes flicked to a computer screen. "Name?" "Grant. Lucas Grant." She typed something, frowned, typed something else. "I don't see a registration." "It's on the website," Lucas said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It said the preview was open to the public." "The preview is open to registered bidders," the receptionist corrected, like she was explaining something very simple to someone very stupid. "Did you complete the registration form?" But Lucas had not completed a registration form. He'd barely managed to find parking. "I can do it now," he said. The receptionist's smile got smaller. "Registration requires a deposit. $10,000. The number hit Lucas like a punch to the stomach. $10,000. He had maybe $3,000 in his checking account, and most of that was supposed to go toward Mia's school supplies and the garage's overdue electric bill. "That's refundable, right?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "If you don't place any winning bids, yes." She folded her hands on the desk. "But the deposit is non-negotiable." Lucas felt Mia's hand slip into his. She was staring up at him with those dark eyes that were too old for a 6-year-old, eyes that had learned too early that the world didn't always give you what you needed. He should leave. He should take his daughter back to Brooklyn, finish the week's repair jobs, and forget about the rusted race car that was probably worth exactly as much as it looked. Nothing. But he thought about the photo, the angles, the stance, the way the car had been shoved into a corner like something people wanted to forget. Sometimes things that look like junk are actually valuable. "I'll do it," Lucas said. The receptionist raised an eyebrow. "The deposit is due now." Lucas pulled out his phone and opened his banking app, trying not to think about the electric bill or the fact that Mia needed new shoes, or the way his hands were shaking just slightly as he transferred money he absolutely could not afford to lose. The receptionist printed a bitter paddle, number 447, and handed it to him along with a glossy catalog that probably cost more to print than Lucas's monthly grocery budget. "The automotive collection is in the back warehouse," she said, already looking past him to the next person in line, someone wearing a suit that cost more than Lucas's truck. Through the main gallery, past the furniture, last door on the left. Lucas thanked her and led Mia deeper into the building. The main gallery was the size of a basketball court, and every inch of it was filled with things that screamed money. Oil paintings in gilded frames, sculptures that looked like they'd been stolen from European churches. Furniture so delicate, Lucas was afraid Mia might break it just by looking at it too hard. And people. Dozens of them, all dressed like they were attending a wedding at a country club Lucas would never be invited to. They moved through the space with the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to check a price tag, murmuring to each other about provenance and authenticity and investment value. Nobody looked at Lucas, or rather, everyone looked at him just long enough to decide he wasn't worth their attention. Lucas was fine with that. He found the door marked Automotive Collection and pushed through into a warehouse that smelled like old rubber and forgotten dreams. The space was colder than the main gallery, dimmer, like whoever designed this place had decided the cars weren't worth the same level of presentation as the paintings. There were maybe a dozen vehicles scattered across the concrete floor. The Corvette from the photos, the Mercedes, a few others that looked expensive and well-maintained and completely out of Lucas's league. And then, in the far corner, almost hidden behind a stack of old tires, was the race car. Lucas walked toward it slowly, Mia's hand still in his. Up close, it looked even worse than the photos suggested. The bodywork was so damaged he could see rust eating through the metal in places. The tires were rotted. The windshield was cracked in a spiderweb pattern that suggested something heavy had hit it. Hard. It was a disaster. It was beautiful. Lucas crouched down beside the front wheel, running his hand along the suspension mounting points. The geometry was unusual, not quite modern, but not vintage either, something in between, something custom. "It's ugly," Mia said. "Yeah," Lucas agreed. "It is." "Then why are you smiling?" Lucas didn't realize he was smiling until she said it. He straightened up, wiping his hands on his jeans even though they were already filthy. Because sometimes, he said. Ugly things are the most interesting. Mrs. Chen says, Mrs. Chen, Lucas interrupted gently, is not here. He walked around the car slowly, cataloging the damage. The body panels were aluminum, which was unusual for anything old enough to look like this. The doors were welded shut, which meant this had been built for racing, not street use, and the rear suspension… Lucas stopped. The rear suspension was wrong, not broken, just wrong. The mounting points were in places that didn't match any production car he'd ever seen. This wasn't something that had been modified. This was something that had been built from scratch. Excuse me. Lucas turned. A man in a navy suit was standing a few feet away, looking at him with the kind of polite disdain usually reserved for people who talked in movie theaters. Yes? Lucas said. Are you interested in this vehicle? Lucas glanced at the car, then back at the man. Maybe. Why? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just curious. We don't usually see serious bidders inspecting the scrap items. Scrap items. Lucas felt something hot flicker in his chest. Who said I'm a serious bidder? He asked. Nobody. The man's smile got sharper. That's my point. He walked away before Lucas could respond, heading toward the Corvette where two other men in expensive suits were examining the chrome. Mia tugged on Lucas's hand. That man was mean. Yeah, Lucas said quietly. He was. But mean didn't mean wrong. Lucas wasn't a serious bidder. He was a broke mechanic with a garage that flooded and a daughter who ate cereal from the box. He had no business being here, and everyone in this building knew it. Lucas looked at the race car again, at the rusted body and the rotted tires and the windshield that would cost a fortune to replace. Then he looked closer. There, just barely visible under the layers of dust and grime, was a small stamped number on the chassis rail. Lucas crouched down, pulling out his phone and turning on the flashlight. The number was partially obscured, but he could make out what looked like a manufacturer's code. His heart started beating faster. He'd seen codes like this before, back when he was working on race cars in Manhattan. Factory stamps. Verification marks. The kind of thing that turned a pile of parts into a documented piece of history. If this car had a chassis number, it had a story. And if it had a story… Ladies and gentlemen. The voice cut through the warehouse like a knife through silk. Lucas straightened up so fast he almost dropped his phone. A woman stood in the doorway between the automotive warehouse and the main gallery. She was tall, maybe 5'9", wearing a black suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it had been grown on her body. Her hair was pulled back in a style that probably had a French name Lucas didn't know, and her heels clicked against the concrete with the precise rhythm of someone who had never doubted herself in her entire life. Lucas knew who she was before anyone said her name. He'd seen her photo on the auction house website, Giselle Hartwell, CEO, founder, the woman who'd built this empire from nothing and now controlled enough wealth to make most people's dreams look like pocket change. Welcome to Hartwell Heritage Auctions, she said, and her voice carried the kind of authority that made even the men in expensive suits stand a little straighter. I'm glad you could join us for this preview. As many of you know, this particular estate sale represents one of the finest collections we've had the privilege to curate. She walked into this warehouse, and the crowd shifted to follow her like she was magnetic north. Most of our focus today will be on the art and furniture in the main gallery, Giselle continued. But I wanted to take a moment to address the automotive collection, since I know some of you have expressed interest. Her eyes swept across the cars, dismissive and efficient, before landing on the race car in the corner. The race car Lucas was still standing next to. Giselle's expression didn't change, but something in her gaze sharpened, like she'd just noticed a stain on an otherwise perfect tablecloth. I should note, she said, still looking at the car, or maybe at Lucas, that not every item in this warehouse is likely to be worth your time. Some vehicles are being sold purely as is for parts or scrap value. We've included them in the auction for the sake of completeness, but I wouldn't advise serious collectors to waste their energy. Someone in the crowd laughed. It was a polite, knowing laugh. The kind of laugh that said we all understand which cars are worth our time and which aren't. Lucas felt his face get hot. Giselle's eyes met his for just a second. Long enough for Lucas to see that she knew exactly what she'd just done. Long enough for him to understand that she'd looked at him, at his oil-stained jacket and his work boots and his daughter in her too big purple coat, and decided he wasn't worth her respect. Then she turned away, leading the crowd back toward the main gallery and the cars that actually mattered. Mia squeezed Lucas's hand. "Daddy, can we go?" Lucas looked down at her. She was staring at the floor, her shoulders hunched, and Lucas realized with a sick feeling that she'd understood the insult too. Maybe not all of it, but enough. He should leave. He should take his daughter home and forget about this place and these people and their casual cruelty. Instead, he pulled out his phone and took a photo of the chassis number. "Not yet," he said softly. "Not yet." The auction started at noon. By 11:45, the main gallery was packed with people holding paddles and champagne flutes, looking like they were attending a very boring party where the entertainment was watching numbers get bigger. Lucas and Mia sat in the back row of folding chairs, as far from the action as physically possible while still technically being in the room. Mia had Gerald the Fox in her lap and was coloring in the margins of the auction catalog with a crayon Lucas had found in his truck's glove compartment. The first items up were paintings. Lucas didn't understand art, but he understood numbers, and the numbers being thrown around made his stomach hurt. 50,000 for something that looked like a toddler's finger painting. 120,000 for a landscape that was pretty, but not that pretty. These people spent more money in 10 minutes than Lucas made in a year. The furniture went next, then the jewelry. Then, finally, almost 3 hours into the auction, the vehicles. The Corvette sold for $400,000. The Mercedes went for $300,000. A vintage Porsche Lucas hadn't even noticed went for $500,000. And then the auctioneer said, "Lot 47, vintage race car, sold as is for parts or scrap. Do I have an opening bid of $5,000? Lucas felt his heart jump into his throat. The room was silent. Nobody raised their paddle. $5,000? The auctioneer repeated, sounding bored. Anyone? More silence. Lucas could hear Mia's crayon scratching against paper. How about $3,000? Nothing. $1,000? Lucas raised his paddle. The auctioneer looked surprised, but recovered quickly. I have 1,000 from paddle 447. Do I have two? Silence. Going once at 1,000. Going twice? 1,100, someone called out. Lucas turned. The man in the navy suit from earlier was smirking at him from 3 rows up. The auctioneer nodded. 1,100. Do I have 12? Lucas raised his paddle. 1,200 from 447. Do I have 13? 2,000, Navy suit said, not even bothering to raise his paddle. The auctioneer looked at Lucas. Lucas looked at his daughter. She was watching him with those 2 old eyes, and he could see her doing the math, counting the dollars they didn't have. Lucas raised his paddle. 3,000. Ishke asasumas imtes. Navy suit laughed. Actually, laughed. You can't be serious. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Do I have 4,000? 5, Zess, Navy suit said. Let's stop wasting time. Navy suit. Lucas's hand was shaking. 5,000 was already more than he should spend. But the chassis number, the custom suspension, the feeling in his gut that said this car was something nobody else could see. 10,000, Lucas said. The room went quiet. Even Mia stopped coloring. Navy suit turned in his chair to stare at Lucas. You're bidding $10,000 on scrap metal? I'm bidding $10,000 on a car, Lucas said evenly. What are you bidding on? Navy suit's face went red. 11,000. Lucas felt the last of his safety net evaporate. 11,000 meant using the deposit. 11,000 meant if he was wrong about this car, he was finished. No backup plan. No second chances. Mia put her hand on his arm. Daddy, it's okay. We can go home. Lucas looked at his daughter, 6 years old and already trying to protect him from his own bad decisions. He raised his paddle. 11,000. Navy suit started to say something, but the auctioneer cut him off. I have 11,000 from 447. Do I have 12? Navy suit glared at Lucas for a long moment. Then he shook his head and turned away. Going once at 11,000. Going twice. The auctioneer's hammer came down. Sold to paddle 447. Lucas sat back in his chair, suddenly exhausted. He just spent $11,000 on a rusted race car that everyone in this room thought was worthless. Either he was about to become a very different kind of man, or he'd just destroyed his daughter's future. He wouldn't know which until he got the car home and really looked at what he'd bought. From somewhere near the front of the room, Lucas heard the distinctive click of expensive heels on hardwood. He glanced up and saw Giselle Hartwell watching him, her expression unreadable. Then she turned away and Lucas was alone again with his daughter and his terrible decision and the sinking feeling that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Getting the car back to Brooklyn turned out to be harder than buying it. The auction house didn't offer delivery for scrap items, which meant Lucas had to arrange a tow truck himself. And the only company that would do it on short notice charged him $800 he hadn't budgeted for. By the time the flatbed arrived at his garage that evening, Lucas had spent nearly $12,000 on a vehicle he still wasn't entirely sure he could afford to keep. The driver was a guy named Tommy, who looked about 60 and had the kind of face that suggested he'd seen every bad decision a person could make with a car and wasn't impressed by any of them. "This is what you bought?" Tommy asked, staring at the rusted race car like it had personally offended him. "Yeah," Lucas said. "For how much?" Lucas told him. Tommy whistled low. "Man, they saw you coming." Lucas didn't argue. He just signed the paperwork and helped Tommy unload the car into the garage, which took 20 minutes and required a hydraulic jack because the wheels were so seized they wouldn't roll. When Tommy finally drove away, Lucas stood in the garage with Mia, staring at what he'd bought in the cold light of a Brooklyn evening. The car looked worse here than it had at the auction house. Smaller, somehow. More broken. The kind of thing you'd see sitting in someone's backyard for 30 years before the city finally made them haul it away. "It's really ugly," Mia said. "I know. Mrs. Chen's gonna say you wasted your money." "Mrs. Chen," Lucas said quietly, "is probably right." "Oh." Mia went inside for dinner, leftover rice and the kimchi Mrs. Chen had dropped off that morning with a pointed comment about Lucas's refrigerator being sad. Lucas stayed in the garage. He turned on the overhead lights, pulled out his toolbox, and started doing what he should have done before spending $11,000, actually examining what he'd bought. The bodywork was worse up close. Rust had eaten through the aluminum in places, leaving holes he could stick his fingers through. The interior was stripped down to bare metal, no seats, no dashboard, just a roll cage and some wiring that looked like it had been installed by someone who learned electrical work from a fever dream. But the chassis was interesting. Lucas crawled underneath with a flashlight and a wire brush, clearing away decades of grease and grime. The frame rails were hand-welded, not factory-stamped, which confirmed this was a custom build. But the welds were perfect, not the kind of thing a hobbyist did in their garage. This was professional work, race team quality. He found the chassis number again, stamped into a plate riveted to the main rail. It was partially corroded, but Lucas could make out most of it, CT-GTR-003. CT could be anything, a builder's initials, a team designation, but GTR, that was specific. Grand Touring Racing. And the 003 suggested this was the third of something, which meant there had been at least two others. Lucas took photos of everything, the chassis number, the welds, the unusual suspension geometry. Then he crawled out from under the car, sat on the concrete floor, and started searching on his phone. CTGTR-003 brought up nothing useful, just forum posts about video games and a Wikipedia article about some Japanese sports car. Lucas tried different combinations, CT Racing, GTR Prototype, Custom Chassis 1960s. Nothing. He was about to give up when he remembered something his father had told him years ago, back when Lucas was still in high school and thought he might want to be a mechanic instead of an engineer. Robert Grant had worked on race cars in the 70s, back when half the teams were just guys with welding equipment and more ambition than sense. He used to tell stories about the cars that came through his shop, some famous, most forgotten. Lucas pulled up his dad's old contacts list, the one he'd saved from Robert's phone after the funeral. Most of the numbers were dead or disconnected, but there were a few he'd kept for reasons he didn't entirely understand. Nostalgia, maybe, or hope that someday he'd need them. He found the number for Henry Morrison. Henry had worked with Robert back in the day, and last Lucas heard, he was running a restoration shop in New Jersey. Lucas had never called him, didn't have a reason to, until now. The phone rang 4 times before someone picked up. "Morrison's." The voice was rough, like gravel in a blender. "Henry Morrison? Who's asking?" "Lucas Grant, Robert Grant's son." There was a pause, then, "Lucas, hell, I haven't heard that name in years. How's your old man doing? Lucas swallowed. He passed 4 years ago. Another pause, longer this time. I'm sorry to hear that. Robert was a good man, knew his way around an engine better than anyone I ever met. Yeah, Lucas said quietly. He did. So what can I do for you, Lucas? You calling for a trip down memory lane? Or you got a reason? I've got a car, Lucas said. Or part of one. I'm trying to figure out what it is. What kind of car? That's the problem. I don't know. It's a race car, custom built, aluminum body, hand-welded chassis. There's a number stamped on it, CT-GTR-003. The line went silent. Henry? Say that again. CT-GTR-003. Henry made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else. Where'd you find it? A state auction in Manhattan. Why? You recognize it? Recognize it, kid. If that number's real, you just bought yourself a piece of history everyone thought was gone. Lucas's heart started beating faster. What do you mean? Callaway, Henry said. Thomas Callaway. He was a race car designer back in the 50s and 60s. Built custom cars for rich guys who wanted something nobody else had. Most of his stuff was one-offs, experimental. He had this idea that he could build the perfect GT car. Light, fast, bulletproof. Called the project GTR-0. Opus some escape. GTR-0, Lucas repeated. Not GTR-003? The project was GTR-0. The cars had individual numbers. He only built 5 of them before the money ran out and the whole thing collapsed. Last anyone heard, all 5 were destroyed or lost. If you've got number 3, how much would it be worth? Lucas interrupted. If it's real. Henry laughed, and this time it was definitely a laugh. If it's real, and if you can prove it, you're looking at 7 figures, easy. Maybe 8 if you find the right buyer. Shot. Lucas felt the garage tilt sideways. You're serious. Dead serious. Those cars are legends. I've been in this business 40 years, and I've never seen one in person. Most people think they're a myth. How do I prove it's real? Documentation, Henry said. Build sheets, factory records, anything with Callaway's name on it. But good luck finding that. Thomas Callaway died in 1987, and most of his records went up in smoke when his shop burned down. Lucas looked at the car sitting in his garage, at the rust and the rot and the broken windshield. What if I can't find documentation? He asked. Then you've got an expensive pile of parts, Henry said bluntly. Nobody's going to pay millions for a car they can't verify. You need proof, Lucas. Without it, that thing's worth whatever the metal weighs. They talked for a few more minutes. Henry gave him names of people who might know more about Callaway's work, historians and collectors who specialized in obscure racing history. Lucas wrote everything down on the back of Mia's school permission slip because he couldn't find actual paper. When he finally hung up, it was past 10 and Mia was asleep upstairs, and Lucas was sitting in his garage next to a car that might be worth $8 million or might be worth nothing at all. He didn't sleep that night. He stayed in the garage pulling parts, taking measurements, comparing everything he found to the grainy photos he could find online of other Callaway builds. The suspension geometry matched. The chassis construction matched. Even the way the body panels were mounted, everything pointed to this being exactly what Henry said it was. But without proof, it didn't matter. Lucas needed documentation, and he had no idea where to start looking. The answer came 3 days later from a source he didn't expect. Marcus Webb. Marcus showed up at the garage on Wednesday afternoon with 2 coffees and a grin that suggested he'd just heard the best gossip of his life. Man, you really did it, Marcus said, staring at the race car like it might bite him. Did what? Lucas asked. He was elbow deep in the engine bay, trying to extract what was left of the motor without breaking anything important. Pissed off Giselle Hartwell. Moms. Lucas straightened up. What? It's all over the auction world, Marcus said, pulling out his phone. Some broke mechanic from Brooklyn bought the scrap car everyone ignored, and now there's rumors it might actually be worth something. He showed Lucas the phone. It was an article from some collector car website Lucas had never heard of. The headline read, Mystery buyer takes chance on Hartwell estate wreck. Could it be a lost Callaway? Lucas felt his stomach drop. How did they find out? Joe? Someone at the auction must have talked. Or maybe someone saw you inspecting it and put two and two together. Either way, people are asking questions. And Giselle Hartwell does not like questions. Why not? Marcus gave him a look. Because she's the one who sold it to you for 11 grand. If it turns out to be worth millions, she's going to look like an idiot who didn't know what she had. That's bad for business, especially her business. Lucas sat down on an overturned bucket. This was getting complicated in ways he hadn't anticipated. What do I do? He asked. Marcus shrugged. Prove it's real, or prove it's fake. Either way, you need to know for sure before this gets bigger. And how do I do that? You find someone who actually knows Callaway's work. Someone who can authenticate it. Lucas thought about the names Henry had given him. Most of them were collectors or dealers, people who'd want to cut if the car turned out to be valuable. But there was one name that stood out, Dr. Samuel Webb. Not related to Marcus, apparently just a coincidence. He was an automotive historian who'd written a book about American race car designers in the 1960s. According to Henry, if anyone could authenticate a Callaway, it was him. Lucas called the number Henry had provided. It went to voicemail. He left a message explaining who he was and what he had, trying not to sound desperate, even though he absolutely was. Doctor. Webb called back 6 hours later. Mr. Grant! The voice on the phone was crisp, academic, the kind of voice that suggested its owner had spent a lot of time in libraries. I received your message. You claim to have a Callaway GTR 0 prototype. I think I do, Lucas said carefully. I have a car with the right chassis number and construction, but I can't prove it without documentation. And you want me to authenticate it? Yes. I charge $5,000 for an authentication, non-refundable, whether the car is genuine or not. Lucas closed his eyes. $5,000. Of course. I don't have $5,000, he said. Then I'm afraid I can't help you, sir. Wait, Lucas said quickly before Dr. Webb could hang up. What if I give you a percentage? If the car's real and I sell it, you get a cut. There was a long pause. That's highly irregular, Doctor, Webb said. So is finding a car everyone thought was destroyed. Another pause, then, surprisingly, send me photos. Clear images of the chassis number, the suspension, the body construction, and any other identifying marks. If what you have looks promising, I'll consider your proposal. Lucas spent the next 3 hours taking the best photos he could manage with his phone and the garage's terrible lighting. He sent everything to Dr. Webb's email and then waited. The response came the next morning. I'll be in New York next week. I can examine the car in person on Thursday. If it's authentic, we'll discuss terms. Lucas read the email 3 times, trying to convince himself this was actually happening. He was still staring at his phone when someone knocked on the garage door. Lucas looked up. Through the small window, he could see a woman standing outside. Tall, dark hair, expensive coat. He opened the door. Giselle Hartwell stood on his doorstep, looking completely out of place in a Brooklyn neighborhood where most people's idea of high fashion was a clean hoodie. Mr. Grant, she said, we need to talk. What? Lucas stared at her. Up close, without the crowd and the champagne and the carefully controlled lighting of the auction house, Giselle looked different. Younger, maybe. Or just more human. There were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and her perfectly styled hair had a few strands out of place. How did you find me? Lucas asked. Your address was on the auction registration. She glanced past him into the garage. May I come in? Why? Because I'm trying to determine whether I made a very expensive mistake. Lucas should have said no. Should have told her to leave and come back with a lawyer if she wanted to renegotiate. But there was something in her voice, not quite desperation, but close to it, that made him step aside. Giselle walked into the garage, her heels clicking on concrete. She stopped when she saw the car. It looks worse than I remembered, she said. It's been sitting in a warehouse for decades, Lucas said. What did you expect? She walked around the vehicle slowly, taking in the rust and the damage and the stripped interior. I expected scrap metal, That's what my appraiser told me it was. Your appraiser was wrong. Giselle turned to look at him. Was he? Yeah, he was. Then what is it, Mr. Grant? Because I've been hearing rumors and I need to know if they're true. Lucas crossed his arms. Why should I tell you? Deb. Because if this car is what people are saying it is, then I undervalued it significantly. That makes me look incompetent, which damages my reputation and my business. I need to know what I'm dealing with. You didn't care what you were dealing with when you sold it, Lucas said. You called it scrap. You mocked me in front of everyone for even looking at it. Giselle's jaw tightened. I apologize for that. Do you? Or are you just apologizing because you might have lost money? So, both, she said bluntly. I shouldn't have been dismissive, and I shouldn't have let personal bias affect my professional judgment. But I'm here now asking directly, is this a Callaway GTR 0? Lucas looked at her for a long moment. She was trying to maintain her composure, but he could see the cracks. The way her hands were clasped a little too tightly, the tension in her shoulders. This wasn't just about money. This was about being wrong in a world where she couldn't afford to be wrong. I don't know yet, Lucas said finally. I think it is, but I can't prove it. Why not? Because I don't have documentation, no build sheets, no factory records, just a chassis number and some construction details that match Callaway's other work. Giselle was quiet for a moment. Then, what would it take to prove it? An expert. Someone who knows Callaway's builds well enough to authenticate it. And do you have someone like that? Lucas hesitated. Maybe. There's a historian coming to look at it next week. Dr. Samuel Webb. Lucas blinked. How did you know? Because he's one of 3 people in the country qualified to authenticate a Callaway, and the other 2 are dead. Giselle pulled out her phone. What's he charging you? Out her. That's not your business. Mr. Grant, if this car is real, it's worth millions. Authentication isn't cheap. If you're paying for it yourself, you're going to go bankrupt before you even get to sell the vehicle. She wasn't wrong. Lucas knew he couldn't afford Dr. Webb's $5,000 fee, and even the percentage deal he'd proposed would only work if the car actually sold. If Dr. Webb said it was fake, Lucas would be left with nothing but debt. I'll handle it, Lucas said. Giselle looked at him like he was a child insisting he could fly. You'll handle it with what? You spent your deposit on this car. You don't have capital for authentication, restoration, or sale. You're going to run out of money before you run out of problems. Then what do you suggest? Lucas asked, more sharply than he intended. A partnership, Giselle said. I cover the authentication costs and the restoration. You maintain ownership. When we sell the car, we split the profit 60-40. 60 for you. 60 for you, Giselle corrected. I made a mistake. I'm willing to pay for it. Lucas stared at her. Why would you do that? Because despite what you think, I'm not in the business of cheating people. I'm in the business of selling valuable things for what they're worth. If I undervalued this car, I want to correct that. And because... She paused, like the next words were difficult. Because you were right. I judged you based on how you looked, not what you knew. That was unprofessional. This is my way of making it right. Lucas wanted to tell her no, wanted to tell her to leave and take her partnership and her guilt somewhere else. But the truth was, he needed help. He needed money and expertise and connections he didn't have. And as much as he hated admitting it, Giselle Hartwell could provide all of that. 40-60, Lucas said. And I have final say on everything. Restoration choices, sale timing, buyer selection. All of it. Giselle nodded. Agreed. And if it turns out to be fake, you eat the authentication cost. I don't pay you back. Fair. Lucas extended his hand. Giselle shook it. Her grip was firm, businesslike. And when she let go, Lucas felt like he'd just signed a contract with someone who played chess while everyone else played checkers. I'll have my lawyers draw up the paperwork, Giselle said. In the meantime, keep this quiet. If word gets out before we authenticate it, the value could drop. Why? Well, because speculation drives prices up. Confirmation can bring them down if the story isn't perfect. We control the narrative. We control the sale. She left without saying goodbye, just walked out of the garage and disappeared into a black car Lucas hadn't even noticed was waiting. When the car pulled away, Lucas stood in the doorway wondering what he'd just agreed to. Mia appeared beside him, Gerald the fox tucked under one arm. "Who was that?" she asked. "Someone who might help us," Lucas said. "Or someone who might screw us over. I'm not sure which yet." "Mrs. Chen says rich people can't be trusted." Lucas looked down at his daughter. "Mrs. Chen says a lot of things. Is she wrong?" Lucas thought about Giselle's offer, about the way she'd apologized, the way she'd admitted her mistake. It could all be an act, a way to get control of something valuable before Lucas realized what he had. Or it could be genuine. "I don't know," Lucas said honestly. "But I guess we're going to find out." Dr. Samuel Webb arrived the following Thursday at exactly 10 in the morning, driving a BMW that looked like it had never seen a dirt road and carrying a metal briefcase that probably cost more than Lucas's monthly rent. He was younger than Lucas expected, maybe late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and glasses that made him look like a college professor who took his job very seriously. "Mr. Grant," he said, shaking Lucas's hand with the grip of someone who didn't do manual labor. "Thank you for accommodating my schedule." "Thanks for coming," Lucas said. "Doctor." Webb looked at the car and his expression didn't change. No excitement, no disappointment, just professional assessment. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the vehicle. "Go ahead." For the next 2 hours, Dr. Webb examined every inch of the car. He took measurements with calipers Lucas had never seen before. He scraped paint samples into small vials. He photographed welds and chassis stamps and body panel gaps, muttering notes into a small recorder. Lucas and Mia watched from the corner of the garage. Mia was coloring again. Lucas was trying not to have a nervous breakdown. Giselle showed up an hour into the inspection, appearing in the garage doorway like she'd been summoned by telepathy. "Dr. Webb," she said smoothly. "Good to see you again." Webb looked up from where he was examining the rear suspension. "Ms. Hartwell, I heard you were involved with this project." "Tangentially," Giselle said, in a tone that suggested nothing about her was ever tangential. "Have you reached any conclusions?" "Not yet, though I will say the construction is consistent with Callaway's documented methods." "But?" Lucas asked. Webb straightened up, brushing dust off his pants. "But consistency isn't proof. I've seen skilled fabricators replicate period-correct techniques. What I need is something definitive. A build sheet, a registration document, something with Callaway's signature or company letterhead. And if we don't have that," Giselle asked, "then the best I can offer is an educated opinion, which won't be enough for serious buyers." Lucas felt his stomach sink. "So we're back where we started." "Not necessarily," Webb said. He walked to the front of the car and crouched down, running his hand along the dashboard area. Callaway had a habit of hiding documentation inside his builds. Build sheets, notes, sometimes even correspondence. He was paranoid about theft, so he'd seal documents inside the frame or behind panels. "You think there might be something inside this car?" Lucas asked. "It's possible, but extracting it without damaging the vehicle would require careful disassembly. We're talking weeks of work." "Then we do it," Giselle said immediately. Webb raised an eyebrow. "That's expensive work, Ms. Hartwell, and there's no guarantee we'll find anything." "I'm aware. How much?" Webb named a figure that made Lucas's vision go dark around the edges. Giselle didn't even flinch. "I'll have the funds transferred today," she said. "How soon can you start?" "I'll need to bring in my team. We can begin next week." Lucas waited until Webb left before turning to Giselle. "You're really going to spend that much on a maybe?" "I'm investing in certainty," Giselle said. "One way or another, we'll know what this car is. That's worth the cost." "And if we don't find anything?" Giselle looked at him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Then we cut our losses and move on." "But somehow, Mr. Grant, I don't think that's going to happen." She left. Lucas stood in the garage with Mia, staring at the car that had taken over his life. "Daddy?" Mia said quietly. "Yeah?" Are we going to be okay? Lucas picked her up, even though she was getting too big for it, and held her tight. I don't know, baby, but we're going to try. And in that moment, sitting in his garage with his daughter in his arms and a mystery car that might be worthless or might be worth millions, Lucas realized he'd passed the point of no return. Whatever happened next, his life would never be the same. Dr. Webb's team arrived the following Monday in a truck that looked like it belonged to a surgical unit, not a restoration shop. 3 people climbed out, all wearing matching polo shirts with Webb's company logo embroidered on the chest. They unloaded equipment Lucas didn't recognize: digital calipers, borescopes, ultraviolet lights, and what looked like a portable X-ray machine. "You're X-raying the car?" Lucas asked, watching them set up in his garage like they were preparing for an archaeological dig. "Non-destructive investigation," Webb explained, adjusting his glasses. "We'll scan the chassis, the body panels, anywhere documentation might be hidden. If we find something promising, then we'll discuss disassembly." But Lucas stepped back and let them work. For 3 days, his garage turned into a laboratory. Webb's team photographed every square inch of the car, took metal samples, analyzed paint composition, and ran the chassis through scanners that beeped and whirred like something from a science fiction movie. Mia thought it was fascinating. She'd plant herself in the corner with Gerald and watch the technicians work, asking questions they were too polite to ignore. "What's that do?" she'd ask, pointing at some piece of equipment. "It measures metal density," the technician would explain patiently. "Why?" "To see if the material matches what was used in the 1960s. "Why?" Lucas had to pull her away before she drove them crazy, but he understood the curiosity. Watching these people take his $11,000 gamble seriously made the whole thing feel real in a way it hadn't before. On the 4th day, Webb called Lucas over to where he was examining the dashboard area with what looked like a fiber optic camera. "There's a void space here," Webb said, pointing at his laptop screen where a grainy image showed the interior of the dashboard cavity. "Behind the instrument panel. It's sealed, but there's definitely something inside." Lucas felt his heart start hammering. "Something like what?" "Can't tell from the scan. Could be debris. Could be documentation. We won't know until we open it." "So open it." Webb gave him a look. "Mr. Grant, cutting into this dashboard could damage the car's value if we're not careful. I need your explicit permission to proceed." Lucas looked at Giselle. Who'd shown up that morning with coffee for Webb's team and had been watching the process with the intensity of someone monitoring a stock ticker. "It's your decision," she said. "I'll support whatever you choose." Lucas thought about it for maybe 5 seconds. "Do it." Webb nodded and gestured to one of his technicians, a woman named Sarah who looked young enough to be in college, but handled the tools like a surgeon. She selected a small rotary cutter and approached the dashboard with the kind of careful precision that made Lucas nervous just watching. The cut took 20 minutes. Sarah worked slowly, stopping every few seconds to check her measurements, making sure she wasn't damaging anything structural. When she finally pulled away the section of metal, everyone in the garage went silent. Inside the cavity, wrapped in what looked like waxed canvas, was a bundle of papers. Webb reached in with gloved hands and carefully extracted the bundle. He set it on a clean table, unwrapped the canvas, and spread out the contents. There were 3 documents. The first was a hand-drawn technical diagram showing suspension geometry and measurements, annotated in pencil with notes that were barely legible. The second was a parts manifest, listing components and suppliers in typed columns that had faded to almost nothing. The third was a build sheet. It was printed on letterhead that read, "Callaway Racing Development" in bold letters across the top. Below that, in careful handwriting, was a list of specifications. Chassis number CT-GTR-003. Completion date March 1964. Engine type, transmission type, final weight. At the bottom, in ink that had faded to brown, was a signature, Thomas R. Callaway. Webb stared at the document for a long moment. Then he looked up at Lucas with an expression that might have been excitement, if Webb were the kind of person who showed excitement. "Mr. Grant," he said quietly, "this is authentic." Lucas felt the garage tilt. "You're sure?" "I'll need to verify the signature and run some tests on the paper and ink, but yes, I'm sure." This is a genuine Callaway Racing Development build sheet for chassis number 3 of the GTR-0 project. Which means what? Lucas asked, even though he knew the answer. Which means, Giselle said, and her voice had an edge to it that Lucas couldn't quite identify, you just became a very wealthy man. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity that made Lucas feel like he was watching his life happen to someone else. Webb took the build sheet back to his lab for authentication, which involved carbon dating the paper, analyzing the ink composition, and comparing the signature to known examples of Callaway's handwriting. Every test came back positive. Meanwhile, word got out. Lucas didn't know how it happened. Maybe someone from Webb's team talked. Maybe one of the collectors who'd been at the auction put 2 and 2 together. But suddenly his phone was ringing constantly with numbers he didn't recognize, and when he made the mistake of answering, it was always the same conversation. Mr. Grant? This is named from company. I heard you have the Callaway GTR-0 prototype. I'd like to discuss a private sale before it goes to auction. Lucas stopped answering his phone. The attention got worse when an automotive news website ran a story with the headline, Lost Callaway Prototype Authenticated, Worth Estimated at $8 to $10 million. The article included a photo someone had taken of the car sitting in Lucas's garage, which meant people were watching his shop. That thought made him deeply uncomfortable. Marcus showed up one afternoon and found Lucas installing a security camera above the garage door. Man, you've lost your mind, Marcus said, watching Lucas drill holes in brick. Someone's been watching the garage, Lucas said. I found footprints in the alley this morning. So call the cops. And tell them what? Someone looked at my building? They'll laugh me out of the station. Marcus leaned against the doorframe. This is getting out of hand. I know. You gonna be okay? Lucas climbed down from the ladder and looked at his friend. Marcus had known him since before Sarah died, back when Lucas's biggest problem was whether to take the job in Manhattan or stay in Brooklyn. He'd watched Lucas fall apart and put himself back together. And he'd never once suggested that Lucas was in over his head. Until now. I don't know, Lucas admitted. A month ago, I was fixing transmissions and worrying about the electric bill. Now I've got people calling me at midnight offering millions of dollars for a car I bought with money I didn't have. It doesn't feel real. It is real, Marcus said, and you need to figure out what you're going to do about it. Giselle wants to auction it. She says we'll get the best price that way. What do you want? Lucas had been asking himself the same question for days. What did he want? The money would change everything. He could pay off the garage, set up a trust for Mia, maybe even stop working 70-hour weeks and actually spend time with his daughter. But the car had stopped being just a car. It was proof that he'd been right when everyone else was wrong. Proof that his father's lessons about seeing value where others saw junk actually meant something. Selling it felt like giving away that proof. I want it to go to someone who'll appreciate it, Lucas said finally. Not just someone who'll lock it in a climate-controlled garage and forget about it. Marcus nodded. Then make that part of the deal. Can I do that? You own the car, don't you? You can do whatever you want. Lucas thought about that. He did own the car. Even with Giselle's partnership, the title was in his name. He had final say. The realization made him feel slightly less like he was drowning. Giselle organized the authentication announcement like she was planning a military operation. She rented a small gallery space in Manhattan, invited automotive journalists and collectors, and arranged for the car to be transported there under armed guard. Armed guard? Lucas repeated when she told him the plan. For a car? For an $8 million car, Giselle corrected. Yes, absolutely armed guard. The event was scheduled for a Friday evening. Lucas spent the entire day beforehand trying to figure out what to wear, eventually settling on the same clothes he'd worn to the auction because they were the only nice things he owned and he'd already humiliated himself in them once. Mia stayed with Mrs. Chen, who'd taken the news about the car's value with her typical stoicism. Don't let them cheat you, was all she said. Rich people always try to cheat. Lucas promised he wouldn't get cheated, even though he had no idea how to keep that promise. The gallery was in Chelsea, all white walls and track lighting and the kind of polished concrete floors that made Lucas's work boots sound like gunshots when he walked. The Callaway sat in the center of the space under spotlights, looking both better and worse than it had in his garage. Someone had cleaned it, which helped. But the cleaning just made the damage more obvious. People started arriving around 6. Lucas recognized a few faces from the original auction, including Navy Suit, who gave him a look that could have stripped paint. Most of the crowd were strangers, collectors, dealers, journalists with cameras and recorders. Giselle worked the room like she'd been born to do it, shaking hands and making introductions, and somehow making everyone feel like they were the most important person there. She was wearing a dark blue suit that probably cost more than Lucas's truck, and she'd done something different with her hair that made her look softer, more approachable. Lucas stood by the car and tried not to panic. Dr. Webb arrived at 6:30 and made his way to a small podium that had been set up near the front. The crowd quieted. "Good evening," Webb said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years being right about things. "Thank you all for coming. I know there's been significant speculation about this vehicle, so I'll get straight to the point. After extensive examination and authentication of the documentation found within the chassis, I can confirm that this is indeed chassis number 3 of Thomas Callaway's GTR-0 project, completed in March of 1964. The room erupted in murmurs. Camera flashes went off. Lucas saw several people pull out their phones. Webb continued, explaining the authentication process, the condition of the build sheet, the verification of Callaway's signature. He spoke for maybe 10 minutes, but Lucas barely heard any of it. He was too busy watching the crowd's reaction, the way people were looking at the car, and at him, with something that looked like hunger. When Webb finished, Giselle took the podium. "As many of you know," she said, "Hartwell Heritage Auctions will be handling the sale of this vehicle. We're planning a special auction event in 6 weeks, with full documentation and provenance provided to all registered bidders. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to acquire a piece of automotive history that the world thought was lost." Someone in the crowd raised their hand. "What's the expected sale price?" Giselle smiled. "We're projecting 8 to 10 million, but the market will ultimately decide. Will there be a reserve? That's between the owner and the auction house." The questions kept coming. Lucas stopped listening. He was staring at the car, at the rust and the dents and the cracked windshield, trying to reconcile this broken thing with the numbers being thrown around the room. 8 million, 10 million, numbers that didn't sound real when applied to something he could touch. After the presentation, people swarmed. They wanted to see the car up close, wanted to ask Lucas questions about where he found it and how he knew what it was. Lucas answered as best he could, but the whole thing felt surreal, like he was playing a role in a movie about someone else's life. Navy Suit approached him near the end of the evening. "Congratulations, Shane," the man said, and he sounded like he was chewing glass. "You got lucky." "Thanks," Lucas said flatly. "You know, I could have bought that car. I was going to bid higher, but I decided it wasn't worth my time." "That was your choice." Navy Suit leaned in closer. "Enjoy it while it lasts. People like you don't stay rich. You'll blow it all within a year and end up right back where you started." Lucas looked at him for a long moment. A month ago, that comment would have hurt, would have made him doubt himself and his decisions. But standing here in this gallery, next to a car that proved he'd been right when everyone else was wrong, Navy Suit's opinion didn't matter anymore. "Maybe," Lucas said, "but at least I'll have had the year." The Navy Suit's face went red. He opened his mouth to say something else, but Giselle appeared at Lucas's elbow like she'd been summoned. "Mr. Grant," she said smoothly, "there's someone I'd like you to meet, if you'll excuse us." She steered Lucas away before Navy Suit could respond. When they were across the room, she let go of his arm. "You handled that well," she said. "Was I supposed to punch him?" "Some people would have. I'm glad you didn't." Lucas glanced back at Navy Suit, who was now talking to another collector and gesturing angrily. "Why do people like that exist?" "Because the world rewards them," Giselle said simply. "Money, power, influence, they get all of it despite being miserable human beings. It's not fair, but it's reality. You're pretty cynical for someone who makes millions selling stuff to people like that." Giselle looked at him, and for just a second, her professional mask slipped. "I'm realistic. There's a difference." Before Lucas could respond, Dr. Webb appeared with a couple who introduced themselves as collectors from California. They wanted to know about the car's restoration plan, whether Lucas intended to make it drivable, what his timeline looked like. Lucas answered their questions, but he was only half present. The other half was watching Giselle across the room, the way she moved between groups, the way she could shift from warm to cold to professional depending on who she was talking to. She was good at this. Better than good. She could have screwed him over at any point, refused to authenticate the car, claimed it was fake, bought him out for pennies before anyone knew what it was worth. But she hadn't. She'd offered him a fair partnership and delivered on every promise. Lucas didn't trust easily. Life had taught him not to. But standing in this gallery, watching Giselle work, he realized he was starting to trust her. That should have scared him more than it did. The event wrapped up around 9. The crowd filtered out, leaving Lucas and Giselle standing in the gallery with the car and a cleanup crew that was already breaking down the podium. "That went well," Giselle said. "Did it?" "We've already had 12 inquiries about private sales. The auction is going to be competitive." Lucas walked over to the car and ran his hand along the fender. Under the lights, he could see every flaw, every bit of damage that decades of neglect had caused. It would take months to restore this thing properly, tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we prepare for the auction. I'll handle the marketing, the buyer outreach, the logistics. You focus on deciding what you want from this." "What I want?" Giselle came to stand beside him. "This car is about to make you rich, Lucas. Really rich. That changes things. Changes how people see you, how they treat you. You need to figure out who you want to be when that happens." Lucas thought about Mia, about the garage, about the life he'd built after Sarah died, small and quiet and safe. "I want to be the same person I am now," he said, "just with better credit." Giselle smiled, and it was a real smile this time, not the professional one she used on clients. "That's harder than it sounds." "I know." They stood there in silence for a moment, both looking at the car. "Can I ask you something?" Lucas said. "Sure." "Why are you doing this? The partnership, the fair split. You could have taken more. Why didn't you?" Giselle was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than Lucas had ever heard it. "Because 5 years ago, someone gave me a chance I didn't deserve. I was broke, angry, and convinced the world owed me something. A collector took a risk on me anyway, taught me the business, gave me credibility. I built everything I have now because someone saw past what I looked like and gave me an opportunity." "So this is you paying it forward?" "This is me remembering what it felt like to be underestimated." She looked at him. "You walked into my auction house and everyone there, including me, decided you weren't worth our time. We were wrong. I hate being wrong, but I hate being unfair more. So yeah, this is me paying it forward and also paying it back." Lucas didn't know what to say to that. Lucas didn't. He settled for a simple thank you. Giselle nodded. "Don't thank me yet. The hard part's still coming." She wasn't wrong. The next 6 weeks were a controlled chaos of preparation and pressure. Giselle's team handled most of it, creating marketing materials, reaching out to potential buyers, managing media inquiries. But Lucas still had decisions to make. Should they restore the car before the auction or sell it as is? Should they set a reserve price? Should they accept private offers or commit to the public auction? Every choice felt loaded with consequences he couldn't predict. Meanwhile, his normal life kept happening whether he had time for it or not. Mia needed help with homework. The garage still had customer cars that needed fixing. Mrs. Chen still appeared at his door with food and unsolicited advice about not trusting rich people. Lucas was running on 4 hours of sleep and more coffee than was probably healthy when the first serious offer came through. A collector from Dubai wanted to buy the car privately for $7 million. Cash. Immediate transfer. No auction, no publicity, just a clean sale. Giselle called Lucas to discuss it. $7 million is real money, she said. It's less than we'd probably get at auction, but it's guaranteed. No risk, no waiting. Lucas was in the garage, underneath a Honda that needed a new exhaust system. What do you think we should do? I think you should consider it seriously. This kind of money changes your life, changes Mia's life. That matters more than squeezing out an extra million. Lucas thought about Mia, about paying for college, for dance lessons she'd mentioned wanting to take, for everything he'd told her they couldn't afford because the money wasn't there. But, he said, because he could hear it in Giselle's voice. But I think this car deserves better than disappearing into someone's private collection in Dubai. I think it should go to someone who'll share it with the world. Museums, exhibitions, that sort of thing. Can we control that? We can try. We can interview buyers, add stipulations to the sale. But ultimately, once the money changes hands, the car belongs to them. Itorapiten, Isham Achit. Lucas crawled out from under the Honda and sat on the garage floor, his back against the tire rack. What would you do if it was your decision? Giselle laughed, but it sounded tired. Honestly, I don't know. The smart move is to take the guaranteed money. But the right move? That's harder to figure out. Then let's be stupid, Lucas said. Let's do the auction. There was a pause on the line, then, you're sure? No, but I didn't get into this by being careful. Why start now? Oh, all right, Giselle said, and Lucas could hear the smile in her voice. Let's be stupid together. The auction was scheduled for a Saturday in late November at Giselle's main gallery in Manhattan. The event had taken on a life of its own, covered by automotive magazines and collector blogs, and even a few mainstream news outlets that normally didn't care about old cars. Lucas watched it all happen from a distance, feeling like he was observing a machine he'd accidentally started but had no idea how to control. 3 days before the auction, Giselle asked him to come to her office in Manhattan. The office was on the 40th floor of a building Lucas had walked past 100 times but never entered. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, and the furniture was the kind that looked uncomfortable but probably cost more than a car. Giselle was sitting behind a glass desk when Lucas arrived, reviewing something on her laptop. Thanks for coming, she said, gesturing to a chair. Lucas sat. What's going on? We need to talk about Saturday, specifically about what happens after. After the auction? Well, after you become a millionaire. Giselle closed her laptop and looked at him directly. You're going to have money you've never had before. People are going to approach you with investment opportunities, business propositions, sob stories. Everyone's going to want a piece of what you have. I'm not an idiot, Lucas said. I'm not going to give money to every person who asks. What? No. Charisse. I know, but I also know how overwhelming this gets. I've seen people go from zero to millions overnight. Most of them make terrible decisions because they don't have anyone telling them the truth. And you're going to tell me the truth? I'm going to try. Giselle pulled out a folder and slid it across the desk. I've put together a list of financial advisors, people I trust. They can help you manage the money, invest it properly, make sure it lasts. Lucas opened the folder. There were business cards, brochures, contact information for firms with names that sounded important. This is assuming we actually get the $8 million, he said. We'll get it, Giselle said with the confidence of someone who'd never failed at anything important. The bidding's already up to 9 in pre-auction interest. Lucas looked up sharply. 9 million? We have 4 confirmed bidders willing to start at 9. If they're all in the room on Saturday, we could hit 12. The number hit Lucas like a physical thing. $12 million, Lucas. Even after the 60-40 split, even after taxes, he'd walk away with more money than he'd ever imagined having. I don't know what to do with that, he said quietly. Start by keeping it quiet, Giselle said. Don't tell people what you have. Don't flash it around. The moment people know you're rich, they'll treat you differently. Some better, most worse. But you sound like you're speaking from experience. I am. Giselle leaned back in her chair. I came from nothing, Lucas. Government housing in Queens, mother who worked 3 jobs, father who wasn't around. When I started making money, I thought it would fix everything. It didn't. It just changed what I had to worry about. Lucas had never heard her talk about her past before. She was always so polished, so controlled. It was easy to forget she'd ever been anything other than exactly what she was now. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because someone needs to, and because I think you're smart enough to listen. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. This car found you for a reason, Lucas. Not because you were lucky. Because you knew what you were looking at when everyone else was blind. Don't lose that just because you suddenly have money. Lucas stood up and joined her at the window. From this high up, Brooklyn looked small and far away. What if I screw this up? He asked. Then you screw it up, Giselle said simply. But at least you'll screw it up as someone who took a chance and won. That's better than most people ever get. They stood there for a while, not talking, just watching the city move below them. Lucas thought about Mia, about the life he wanted to give her, about whether $8 million could buy the kind of security he'd been chasing since Sarah died. He didn't know, but he was about to find out. Saturday arrived faster than Lucas wanted and slower than he could stand. He spent Friday night lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling and running numbers in his head that didn't make sense no matter how many times he calculated them. 8 million, 12 million. 60% of either number was more money than his father had made in his entire lifetime. Around 3 in the morning, he gave up on sleep and went down to the garage. The Callaway was gone, transported to Manhattan 2 days earlier under security that made Lucas feel ridiculous and nervous at the same time. But the garage still smelled like it, old metal and history, and the particular scent of a project that had taken over his life. He sat on the floor where the car had been and tried to remember what it felt like a month ago, before any of this happened, before authentication and partnerships and newspaper articles, when it was just him in a rusted race car and a feeling in his gut that said this might be something special. That version of Lucas seemed very far away now. Mia found him there around 6, still in her pajamas with Gerald tucked under her arm. "You're supposed to be sleeping," Lucas said. "So are you." She sat down next to him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Are you scared?" Lucas thought about lying, thought about being the confident father who had everything under control. But Mia was too smart for that, and he was too tired. "Yeah," he said. "I'm scared." "Why?" "Because everything's about to change, and I don't know if I'm ready for it." Mia leaned her head against his arm. "Mrs. Chen says change is like when the tooth falls out. It's scary and it hurts, but then you get something better." Lucas smiled despite himself. "Mrs. Chen has a lot of opinions about my life. She says it's because you need help. She's probably right." They sat there in the quiet garage until the sun came up and Mrs. Chen started banging on the door, announcing that she'd made breakfast, and Lucas looked like he needed food before he passed out. The auction started at 2. Lucas wore the same clothes he'd worn to the authentication event because buying new ones felt like tempting fate. Giselle had offered to send a car, but Lucas drove himself, needing the control of his own hands on the wheel even if Manhattan traffic made him want to scream. He left Mia with Mrs. Chen again. She'd begged to come, but Lucas couldn't handle the pressure of the auction and taking care of his daughter at the same time. Mrs. Chen had accepted the responsibility with her usual stoicism, then handed Lucas a small jade charm on a red string. "For luck," she said. "I didn't know you believed in luck." "I don't, but you need all the help you can get." Lucas put the charm in his pocket and drove to Manhattan. The gallery was packed when he arrived. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, cameras set up in the back. Lucas recognized some faces from the authentication event, but most were strangers. Wealthy strangers, judging by the watches and shoes and the way they carried themselves like gravity, affected them differently. Giselle found him near the entrance. She was wearing black again, but somehow looked different, sharper, more focused. "You ready?" she asked. "No." "Good." "Neither am I." She gestured toward the front. "I saved you a seat, 3rd row aisle. You'll have a clear view of the bidding." "Where will you be?" "Everywhere." She checked her watch. "I need to do final prep with the auctioneer. Try not to panic." "That's not helpful advice." "I know." She squeezed his shoulder, a gesture so quick and unexpected that Lucas almost missed it. Then she was gone, moving through the crowd like water. Lucas found his seat. The man next to him was reading the auction catalog, making small notes in the margins with a gold pen that probably cost more than Lucas's monthly grocery budget. "First time?" the man asked without looking up. "That obvious?" "You look like you're about to throw up. Either first time or you're about to bid more than you can afford." He closed the catalog and extended his hand. "Richard Chen. No relation to your Mrs. Chen, I assume." Lucas shook his hand, confused. "How do you know about Mrs. Chen?" "I read the article. The one about the mechanic from Brooklyn who bought the Callaway for $11,000. They mentioned your neighbor. Good story. Very American dream." Lucas didn't know there had been an article that detailed. The thought of strangers knowing about Mrs. Chen, about his garage, about his life, made his skin crawl. "You here for the car?" Lucas asked, changing the subject. "Considering it, though the price is already higher than I'd like. Pre-auction bids are up to 9.5. 9.5 million? You didn't know?" Richard looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. "Ms. Hartwell runs a tight ship, but information leaks. There are at least 6 serious bidders in this room. It's going to get expensive." Lucas felt his stomach drop. He'd prepared himself for 8 million, maybe 10. But if the starting bid was 9.5, where would it end? The lights dimmed before he could spiral further into panic. A woman in a navy suit stepped up to the podium at the front of the room. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Hartwell Heritage Auctions. I'm Victoria Reynolds, and I'll be your auctioneer today." Her voice was crisp and professional, the kind of voice that suggested she'd done this 1,000 times and nothing ever rattled her. "We have an exceptional item for you this afternoon," Victoria continued. "Lot number 1, the only lot of today's auction, chassis number CT-GTR-003, the Callaway GTR-0 prototype. As detailed in your catalogs, this vehicle has been authenticated by Dr. Samuel Webb and comes with full documentation and provenance. We'll begin bidding at $8 million. The room went silent. Lucas could hear his own heartbeat. "Do I have 8 million? Victoria asked. 3 paddles went up simultaneously. 8 million from paddle 12. "Do I have 8.5? Another paddle. 8.5 from paddle 7. "Do I have 9? Lucas watched the numbers climb like he was watching a car crash in slow motion. 9 million. 9.5. 10. The bidders were relentless, raising their paddles with casual gestures that represented more money than Lucas had ever conceptualized. At 11 million, 2 bidders dropped out. At 12, another one folded. That left 3 people still in the game, and Lucas recognized one of them, Navy Suit. The man from the original auction, sitting in the front row with his paddle raised and a smile on his face that suggested he was enjoying this. 12.2, Victoria called. "Do I have 12.5? Navy Suit raised his paddle. 12.5 from paddle 3. "Do I have 12.8? One of the other bidders, a woman in her 60s with white hair and a string of pearls, raised her paddle. 12.8 from paddle 18. "Do I have 13? Navy Suit again. The third bidder, a younger man Lucas didn't recognize, shook his head and lowered his paddle. Now it was just 2. Navy Suit and the woman with pearls. 13 million, Victoria said. "Do I have 13.2? The woman raised her paddle. 13.2 from paddle 18. Navy Suit turned in his seat to look at the woman. Even from 3 rows back, Lucas could see the calculation in his eyes. He was trying to figure out if she'd keep going, how much higher he'd have to bid to break her. "Do I have 13.5? Victoria asked. Navy Suit raised his paddle. The woman didn't hesitate. Up went her paddle. 13.8. But the mo. Navy Suit's jaw tightened. Lucas watched him war with himself, pride fighting with practicality. The man wanted to win, wanted to be the one who owned the car Lucas had pulled out from under him. But at some point, even pride had a price limit. 14 million, Navy Suit said, loud enough that he didn't need to raise his paddle. The room shifted. People leaned forward. This was the moment where it either ended or went completely insane. Victoria looked at the woman with pearls. "Do I have 14.2? The woman studied her catalog for a long moment, then quietly, 14.5. Navy Suit stood up. Actually stood up, like sitting down for this was somehow beneath him. 15 million, he said. Lucas stopped breathing. The woman looked at Navy Suit for a long time. Then she set her paddle down in her lap and shook her head. 15 million from paddle 3, Victoria said, and her voice had taken on an edge of excitement she'd been suppressing. Going once at 15 million. Lucas couldn't believe what he was hearing. $15 million. His 60% would be $9 million. $9 million for a car he'd bought for $11,000. Going twice at 15 million. Navy Suit was still standing, looking around the room like he was daring anyone to challenge him. Fair warning at 15 million. The room held its breath. Victoria's hammer came down with a crack that sounded like thunder. Sold to Paddle 3 for $15 million. The room erupted in applause. People were standing, turning to look at Lucas like they just watched him win the lottery. Richard Chen next to him was grinning and saying something Lucas couldn't hear over the roaring in his ears. $15 million. He just sold a car for $15 million. Lucas stood up because sitting down felt impossible. His legs were shaking. His hands were shaking. Everything was shaking. Giselle appeared at his side, her hand on his elbow, steadying him. "Breathe," she said quietly. $15 million. I know. That's $9 million for me. I can do math, Lucas. He looked at her and saw that she was smiling. Not her professional smile, not the one she used on clients. A real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "We did it," she said. "You did it," Lucas corrected. "I just showed up. You found the car. You took the risk. This is your win." Navy Suit was making his way toward them, pushing through the crowd with the determined stride of someone who'd just spent $15 million and wanted everyone to know it. "Mr. Grant," he said when he reached them, "congratulations on your sale." "Thanks," Lucas said carefully. "I trust you'll ensure all documentation is in order. For $15 million, I expect perfection." "You'll get what was promised," Giselle said smoothly. "Full provenance, authentication certificates, and transfer of title. We'll coordinate delivery once payment clears." Navy Suit looked at her, then at Lucas. "I want it clear that I'm not buying this because I like you or respect your story. I'm buying it because it's a Callaway, and I collect Callaways. This has nothing to do with you personally." Lucas felt something hot flash through his chest. "I never thought it did." "Good. Because people like you, people who stumble into money, they usually don't last. You'll spend it, lose it, and end up right back where you started. I've seen it 100 times. Giselle opened her mouth to say something, but Lucas spoke first. "You're probably right," he said quietly. "I don't know how to be rich. I don't know the rules or the etiquette or how to make small talk at country clubs. But I know how to work. I know how to see value where other people see trash. And I know that you just paid $15 million for something I bought for $11,000 because I was willing to look closer than you did." Navy Suit's face went red. "You got lucky." Yes, maybe. But you got beat by a mechanic from Brooklyn who doesn't know the rules." Lucas smiled, and it felt good. "Enjoy the car." He walked away before Navy Suit could respond, Giselle keeping pace beside him. "That was reckless," she said when they were out of earshot. "I know. He could make trouble for you." "Let him try." Giselle laughed, and it was a sound Lucas had never heard from her before. Genuine and surprised, and maybe a little proud. "You're going to be fine," she said. "You sound sure." "I am." She stopped walking and turned to face him. Most people who come into money get lost in it. They forget who they were, try to become someone else. "But you just told off a billionaire because he insulted your work ethic. That's not someone who's going to lose themselves." Lucas didn't know what to say to that. He settled for, "Thank you for everything." "Okay." "We're not done yet," Giselle said. "We still have to transfer the title, process the payment, handle the tax implications. You're going to need lawyers, accountants, people who know how to manage this kind of money." "I know. And you're going to need to decide what comes next. What you do with your life now that you don't have to worry about money." Lucas hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd been so focused on the auction, on getting through it, that he hadn't considered what happened after. "I have a garage," he said. "I have customers who need their cars fixed." "You have $9 million, Giselle countered. "You don't need to fix cars anymore." "What if I want to?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Then you're stranger than I thought." The paperwork took 3 hours. Lucas signed documents he barely understood, initialed clauses his lawyer, a woman Giselle had recommended named Patricia, who charged $500 an hour and was worth every penny, explained in terms that made his head spin. By the time everything was done, it was past 7, and Lucas's hand hurt from signing his name so many times. The payment will clear in 3 business days, Patricia explained, packing up her briefcase. Once it does, the funds will be transferred according to the partnership agreement. 60% to you, 40% to Ms. Hartwell, minus the agreed-upon expenses for authentication and restoration preparation. How much is that? Lucas asked. Patricia pulled out a calculator and did some quick math. After all deductions and assuming the full $15 million clears, you're looking at approximately $8.9 million before taxes. And after taxes? Roughly $5.3 million, depending on your state filing status and deductions. $5 million. Lucas tried to imagine what that looked like, what it meant, and came up empty. What do I do with it? He asked. That's not my area of expertise, Patricia said, but I'd recommend meeting with the financial advisors Ms. Hartwell suggested. Don't make any major decisions for at least a month. Let yourself adjust. She left. Lucas sat in the empty conference room, staring at the stack of papers in front of him, contracts and certificates and proof that he had just changed his life in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. Giselle knocked on the doorframe. You okay? I don't know what I am. She came in and sat across from him. You're overwhelmed. It's normal. Is it? Lucas looked at her. Did you feel like this when you made your first big sale? My first big sale was for $200,000. And yes, I felt exactly like this. Like I'd stepped through a door I couldn't find my way back through. How long did it take to feel normal again? I'll let you know when it happens. Lucas laughed, and it came out shaky. That's not reassuring. It's honest. Giselle folded her hands on the table. Can I give you some advice? Please. Go home, hug your daughter, sleep in your own bed. Tomorrow you can start figuring out what to do with the money. But tonight, just be Lucas Grant from Brooklyn. Before all this gets complicated. It was good advice. Lucas took it. He drove back to Brooklyn in the dark, the city lights blurring past his windows. When he pulled up to his building, Mrs. Chen was waiting on the steps with Mia, both of them bundled in jackets against the November cold. Mia ran to him before he was even out of the truck. Did you sell it? She asked, breathless with excitement. Yeah, baby. I sold it. For how much? Lucas crouched down to her level. Enough that we don't have to worry about money for a long time. Mia's eyes went wide. Like, enough to buy new cereal? Enough to buy a cereal factory. She threw her arms around his neck, and Lucas held her tight, feeling the reality of it all settle into his bones. This wasn't about cars or auctions or proving people wrong. This was about making sure his daughter never had to cut around green spots on bread again. Mrs. Chen approached them, moving slowly in that way she had that suggested her joints hurt, but she'd never admit it. You did good? She asked. I did good, Lucas confirmed. She nodded, satisfied. Then come inside. I made jigai. You look like you need soup. Lucas followed her into the building, Mia's hand in his, and felt something loosen in his chest. The money was real. The sale was real. But so was this. His neighbor's soup and his daughter's excitement and the worn carpet in the hallway that needed replacing. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to be rich. Tonight, he was just going to be himself. They ate soup in Mrs. Chen's small apartment, sitting at her kitchen table that had seen better decades. Mia chattered about her day, about the movie they'd watched, about how Gerald had fallen behind the couch and needed rescuing. Mrs. Chen listened with the patience of someone who'd raised 3 kids of her own, asking questions and nodding in all the right places. So what now? She asked Lucas when Mia had exhausted her stories and gone to watch cartoons in the living room. What do you mean? You have money. What are you going to do with it? Lucas had been asked that question 3 times already today, and he still didn't have a good answer. Make sure Mia's taken care of, he said. Pay off the garage, save the rest. Mrs. Chen made a sound that might have been approval or might have been skepticism. You're not going to move? Buy a big house somewhere fancy? Why would I do that? Because that's what people do when they get rich. They leave. Lucas looked at her. She was staring into her soup bowl, not meeting his eyes, and he realized with a start that she was worried that he'd take Mia and disappear into whatever world rich people lived in. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. This is home. You're here. Our life is here. Your life might be different now. Maybe, but I'm not, so. Mrs. Chen looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, she smiled. Really smiled, the kind that made her whole face soften. Good, she said, because I already told the building manager you're going to fix the boiler. It's been making noise. Lucas laughed. I have $5 million and you want me to fix the boiler? Money doesn't mean you forget how to work. She was right. Money didn't change what he knew how to do, what he was good at. He was still a mechanic, still a father, still the guy who fixed things because that's what he knew. The money just meant he could choose which things to fix. Later that night, after Mrs. Chen sent them home with leftovers and Mia was asleep in her bed with Gerald tucked under her arm, Lucas sat in the garage. The space where the Callaway had been was still empty, but it didn't feel as lonely as it had that morning. His phone buzzed. A text from Giselle. Payment cleared early. Check your account. Lucas opened his banking app with hands that weren't quite steady. The number that appeared on the screen didn't look real. $8,900,000. Just sitting there, in his account, like it belonged there. He stared at it for a long time, waiting to feel different, waiting for the moment where everything clicked and he understood what this meant. It didn't come. He was still Lucas Grant, still the guy who'd bought a rusted car on a hunch and got lucky. The money was real, but it hadn't changed him yet. Maybe it never would. Another text from Giselle. Congratulations, you earned this. Lucas typed back, we earned this. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, get some sleep. Tomorrow, we celebrate. Lucas smiled and put his phone away. He sat in the quiet garage for a while longer, thinking about his father, about Sarah, about all the people who'd shaped his life and weren't here to see what he'd become. Then he went upstairs, checked on Mia one more time, and fell asleep in his own bed. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new decisions, new complications. But tonight, he was just a father who'd done right by his daughter. That felt like enough. The celebration Giselle had mentioned turned out to be dinner at a restaurant Lucas had only read about in magazines. The kind of place where the menu didn't list prices and the waiters wore suits, nicer than anything Lucas owned. She'd made the reservation for 3, which confused him until Mia climbed into the back of the car, wearing her best dress, and announced that Mrs. Chen had told her to use good manners. You're bringing my daughter to a business dinner? Lucas asked as he drove toward Manhattan. This isn't a business dinner, Giselle said from the passenger seat. She was wearing something dark green that probably had a designer name Lucas wouldn't recognize. This is a celebration. And Mia's part of this story too, Sha. Lucas glanced in the rearview mirror. Mia was clutching Gerald and staring out the window at the city lights with an expression of determined sophistication that made her look about 40 years old. The restaurant was on the Upper West Side, tucked into a building Lucas had walked past a dozen times without noticing. Inside, everything was warm, wood, and soft lighting, and the kind of quiet that suggested people here didn't need to talk loudly because everyone was already listening. The host recognized Giselle immediately and led them to a corner table that somehow felt both private and perfectly positioned. Lucas pulled out Mia's chair before sitting down himself, earning an approving nod from the waiter who materialized with water glasses and menus. Can I order anything? Mia whispered. Within reason, Lucas said. What's reason? Giselle smiled. It means if it's on the menu, you can have it. Mia's eyes went wide. She opened the menu, which was leather-bound and heavier than her school books, and started studying it with the focus of someone planning a military campaign. She's going to order the most expensive thing just to test you, Lucas said quietly. Let her, Giselle replied. When's the last time she got to order whatever she wanted? Lucas couldn't remember. Maybe never. They ordered. Mia chose duck because she'd never had it before. Lucas got steak because it was the only thing on the menu he fully understood. And Giselle ordered something with too many French words for Lucas to follow. The food came in courses, small and artfully arranged, the kind of portions that would have made Mrs. Chen complain about waste. But it was good, better than good. Lucas had never tasted anything like it. So, Giselle said, setting down her wine glass, have you thought about what you're going to do? With the money? With your life? Lucas cut into his steak, buying time. He'd been asking himself the same question for 3 days and still didn't have an answer that felt right. Keep the garage running. he said finally. Maybe expand it. Hire some help so I'm not doing everything myself. That's it? What else should I do? Giselle leaned back in her chair, studying him with those sharp eyes that always seemed to see more than Lucas wanted to show. You could do anything. Travel, invest, start a business, retire at 32. Most people would kill for the kind of freedom you just bought yourself. I'm not most people. I've noticed. Mia had been quiet during this exchange, focused on her duck, but now she looked up. Daddy, can we keep the garage? Of course we can, baby. Why would you think we wouldn't? Because Mrs. Chen said rich people don't fix cars. They pay other people to fix cars. Lucas shot Giselle a look that said, See what you started? Mrs. Chen isn't wrong, Giselle said diplomatically. But your dad isn't like most rich people. He actually enjoys the work. Do you enjoy work? Mia asked her. Giselle paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. It was the first time Lucas had seen her caught off guard by a question. Sometimes, she said carefully, when it's challenging, when I'm solving problems that matter. Is selling cars challenging? Very, especially when the car is special and the buyers are difficult. Mia considered this while chewing thoughtfully. Was Daddy's car special? The most special car I've ever sold. Why? Giselle glanced at Lucas, something passing between them that Lucas couldn't quite name. Because nobody else saw what it was, except your dad. Mia nodded like this made perfect sense, then returned to her duck. But Lucas kept looking at Giselle, wondering what she wasn't saying. They finished dinner and ordered dessert. Chocolate, something for Mia, coffee for Lucas, nothing for Giselle, who claimed she never ate sugar after 7. The conversation drifted to safer topics. Mia's school, the weather, the logistics of the title transfer that would happen early next week. When the check came, Giselle grabbed it before Lucas could. This one's on me, she said. You just made $6 million off my car, Lucas protested. I can pay for dinner. Consider it a thank you for trusting me when you had no reason to. Lucas wanted to argue, but Mia kicked him under the table, gently but with purpose, and he took the hint. Sometimes you just let people do nice things. They walked out into the November cold, Mia between them holding both their hands. The city felt different at night, softer somehow, like the darkness smoothed out all the hard edges. Can I ask you something? Lucas said as they reached his truck. Sure, Giselle said. Why did you really partner with me? Not the official reason, the real one. Giselle was quiet for a moment, watching taxis stream past on the street. Because I saw myself in you. Not the current me, but the version from 10 years ago. Broke, desperate, convinced I was one bad decision away from losing everything. She looked at him. I wanted to see what would happen if someone like that got a real chance, if they'd take it or waste it. And you took it. That matters more than you think. Lucas didn't know what to say to that. He settled for, thank you, Chi. Giselle smiled, then crouched down to Mia's level. You take care of your dad, okay? He's going to need help figuring out how to be rich. I know, Mia said seriously. Mrs. Chen already told me. Mrs. Chen is a wise woman. She says you're pretty, but probably dangerous. Giselle laughed, surprised and genuine. Mrs. Chen isn't wrong about that either. She stood up, gave Lucas a brief hug that felt both professional and oddly personal, then walked to her own car, a black sedan that had been waiting at the curb. Lucas watched her drive away, then lifted Mia into the truck. I like her, Mia announced as Lucas started the engine. Yeah? She's not fake nice. She's real nice. That's better. Lucas smiled. His daughter was 6 years old and already understood more about people than most adults. You're right, he said. That is better. The weeks that followed the auction felt like living in someone else's life. The money transferred on a Tuesday morning, $8,900,000 appearing in Lucas's account like some kind of accounting error that would get corrected any minute. He stared at the number for 20 minutes before calling the bank to make sure it was real. It was real. Patricia, the lawyer, had been right about the taxes. After everything cleared, Lucas ended up with just over $5 million. Still an impossible number, ish, but at least one he could wrap his head around without feeling like he was going to pass out. The financial advisors Giselle recommended turned out to be two women in their 50s who ran their firm out of an office in Midtown and talked about money like it was a tool, not a religion. They didn't try to impress Lucas with jargon or make him feel stupid for asking basic questions. They just laid out options and let him choose. $3 million went into a trust for Mia, locked tight until she turned 25, managed by professionals who couldn't touch it no matter how nicely they asked. The college fund alone made Lucas's chest tight. His daughter would never have to choose a school based on what they could afford. She could study anything, anywhere, without the weight of debt crushing her before she even started. Another $1 million went into investments. Boring stuff, the advisors said. Index funds and bonds and things that would grow slowly but reliably. Lucas didn't understand half of it, but he trusted them, which was a strange feeling for someone who'd spent most of his life trusting no one. That left about $1 million in change for everything else. Lucas paid off the garage, all of it, the mortgage and the equipment loans and the back taxes he'd been dodging for 2 years. Then he upgraded the tools, bought a proper lift to replace the sketchy one that had been threatening to kill him since he moved in, and hired 2 mechanics. Tommy was 23 and fresh out of trade school with more enthusiasm than experience. Rita was 58 and had been fixing cars since before Lucas was born, with hands that could diagnose an engine problem by sound alone. Together, they took enough pressure off Lucas that he could breathe for the first time in years. But the biggest change wasn't the money or the help, or even the fact that he could finally buy groceries without checking his account first. The biggest change was internal. Lucas had spent 4 years believing he was one mistake away from losing everything. One missed payment, one sick week, one broken car that he couldn't fix fast enough. The fear had been so constant he'd stopped noticing it, like background noise you only hear when it stops. Now it had stopped. And the silence was strange. Mrs. Chen noticed. She always noticed. "You look different," she said one evening when Lucas dropped off Mia so he could meet with an accountant about quarterly tax payments, a phrase that still made him feel like an imposter. "Different how?" Lucas asked. "Less tired, less scared." She studied him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Money agrees with you. I'm the same person I was 3 months ago." "No, you're not. You're the person you would have been if life hadn't beaten you down first." She handed him a container of something that smelled incredible. "Eat this. You still look too skinny." Lucas took the food and tried not to get emotional about the fact that Mrs. Chen, who complained about everything, thought he looked better. The consulting work started small. Giselle sent him a referral, a collector in Connecticut who thought he had a rare Porsche and needed someone to verify it before dropping $250,000. Lucas drove up on a Saturday, spent 3 hours examining the car, and discovered it was a replica. Well-made, convincing, but fake. The collector was disappointed but grateful. He paid Lucas $2,000 for saving him from a massive mistake, and Lucas drove home feeling like maybe he actually knew what he was doing. The second job came a week later. Then a third. Then enough that Lucas had to start scheduling them around the garage work, which was fine because Tommy and Rita could handle most of the regular customers now. By February, Lucas was authenticating cars twice a month, sometimes more. He developed a reputation, the guy who'd found the Callaway, the mechanic who could spot a fake from across a warehouse. People started calling him directly, bypassing Giselle entirely, though he always gave her a heads up out of professional courtesy. And maybe something else too, though Lucas wasn't ready to examine that too closely yet. The turning point came in March, when a widow from New Jersey called about her late husband's collection. He'd been a serious collector, she said, and she needed someone to appraise everything for the estate. Could Lucas help? Lucas drove down on a rainy Thursday and found himself in a climate-controlled garage that held 12 cars, each one more impressive than the last. Ferraris and Porsches, and a Jaguar E-Type that made his hands itch to drive it. The widow's name was Margaret. She was in her 70s, elegant and composed despite the grief Lucas could see in the tight corners of her mouth. "My husband spent 40 years collecting these," she said, walking Lucas through the garage. "I need to know what they're worth. The lawyers keep asking, and I keep telling them I have no idea." Lucas spent 6 hours examining the cars, taking notes, comparing chassis numbers to databases on his phone. When he was done, he had a number that made Margaret sit down hard in a folding chair. $4.2 million, she repeated. Conservative estimate, Lucas said, could be higher at auction depending on the market. Margaret was quiet for a long time. He would have been pleased. He always said these cars were an investment, but I think he just loved them. He had good taste. He had expensive taste, Margaret corrected with a small smile. Thank you for this. I know it's not easy putting a price on someone's passion. Lucas charged her $5,000 for the appraisal, a number that felt both too high and too low, and drove back to Brooklyn thinking about passion and value and the difference between the two. That night, he told Mia about the job over dinner. Mrs. Chen had made dumplings, and they were eating them straight from the steamer because Lucas still hadn't bought nice plates. Why was she sad? Mia asked through a mouthful of dumpling. Because her husband died, and now she has to sell his cars. That's really sad. Yeah, it is. Mia chewed thoughtfully. When you die, I'm keeping the garage. Lucas nearly choked on his dumpling. What? I'm keeping it, even if I don't fix cars. Because it's important to you, so it's important to me. Lucas looked at his daughter, 6 years old, sauce on her chin, making declarations about his eventual death with the seriousness of someone 3 times her age, and felt his throat get tight. You don't have to keep the garage, baby. You can do whatever you want. I know, but I want to keep it. She reached for another dumpling. Mrs. Chen says you built something good here. She says that matters. Mrs. Chen talks to you about a lot of things, doesn't she? Someone has to teach me stuff. You're always working. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact, but it hit Lucas hard anyway. He was working less than he had been before the money, but Mia was right. He was still working, still spending evenings in the garage or on the phone with collectors or reviewing authentication requests. He traded one kind of stress for another, and his daughter had noticed. How about this? Lucas said. Tomorrow we take the whole day off. No work, no garage, just you and me. We can do whatever you want. Mia's eyes went wide. Anything? Within reason. There's that word again. Okay, actually, anything. What do you want to do? Mia thought about it for a serious moment. The museum. The one with the big dinosaur. Lucas smiled. The Natural History Museum? Yeah, and then ice cream, and then the park. She paused. And you have to bring Gerald. I have to bring Gerald? He's never been to a museum. It's educational. Lucas laughed and agreed, and the next day they took the train into Manhattan. Even though Lucas could have driven, could have afforded parking, taking the train felt normal in a way nothing else did anymore. They spent 4 hours at the museum. Mia made Lucas read every placard, asked questions that Lucas mostly couldn't answer, and insisted on buying Gerald a tiny museum t-shirt from the gift shop. Then they got ice cream from a cart outside, even though it was only 50 degrees, and walked through Central Park while Mia told him everything she'd learned about velociraptors. It was the best day Lucas had in months. On the train ride home, Mia fell asleep against his shoulder. Gerald clutched in her arms, wearing his new t-shirt. Lucas watched the city blur past the windows and thought about Margaret the widow, about her husband's collection, about what it meant to spend a life building something only to have it sold off when you were gone. He didn't want that for Mia. Didn't want her to remember him as the guy who was always working, always chasing the next job, the next authentication, the next thing that needed fixing. The Callaway had given him money. But it had also given him something more dangerous, the belief that he had to keep proving himself, that one big win wasn't enough, that he needed to do it again and again to prove it wasn't a fluke. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe the point wasn't to find another Callaway. Maybe the point was to use the first one's gift wisely, to build a life that didn't require constant hustle just to survive. When they got home, Mrs. Chen was waiting on the steps with more food and a knowing look. You took the day off, she observed. I did. Good, you needed it. How do you always know what I need? Mrs. Chen smiled. Because I pay attention. You should try it sometime. The next morning, Lucas called Giselle. I need to cut back on the consulting work, he said without preamble. There was a pause. Why? Is something wrong? No, everything's fine. I just realized I'm spending so much time authenticating other people's cars that I'm not actually living my own life. Giselle was quiet for a moment. That's very mature of you. Elle was quiet for a... Don't sound so surprised. I'm not surprised. I'm impressed. Most people can't recognize when they're falling into the same trap they just escaped from. Lucas thought about that. She was right. Lucas thought he'd spent years trapped by money, or the lack of it, and now he was getting trapped by it again, just from the other direction. I'm going to keep doing some consulting, he said, but maybe one job a month instead of one a week. I want time to actually be with Mia, to fix cars because I enjoy it, not because I have to prove something. What about the garage? Tommy and Rita can handle it. I'll still be there, still work on the interesting projects, but I don't need to be there 70 hours a week anymore. So what will you do with all this free time? Lucas looked out the window at the garage, at the space where the Callaway had sat for those intense weeks when everything changed. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I'm going to find out. 3 weeks later, Giselle called with news that made Lucas's stomach drop in a way he'd almost forgotten was possible. The buyer wants to return the car, she said. Lucas had been under a Honda. Now we wait. Dr. Webb's report goes public tonight. By tomorrow morning, the automotive world is going to be talking about nothing else. And Cross is going to have to decide whether fighting us publicly is worth exposing himself to the kind of scrutiny he's spent his career avoiding. Ethan's phone buzzed. An email from the New York Times with the subject line, "Interview request, Victor Crane prototype story." They want to interview me, Ethan said, reading the message, about how I found the car. Are you going to do it? I don't know. Part of me wants to tell the whole story. My father's research, the decades of searching, everything. But another part just wants this to be over. Serena leaned against the workbench, her expression thoughtful. Your father spent 40 years being invisible, chasing something nobody believed in. This is your chance to make him visible, to put his name on the story that proves he was right all along. What if that makes things worse? What if it gives Cross more ammunition? Then it gives him more ammunition. But it also gives you a platform. Once your story is public, once people know your name and your father's name and what you found, Cross can't make you disappear quietly. There's power in being visible, even when it feels dangerous. Ethan thought about that for a long time. Then he opened the email and typed a response. Yes, I'll do the interview. When and where? The response came back almost immediately. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Our office is in Manhattan. Bring any documentation you have. He showed the message to Serena. She nodded slowly. Good. That's good. By the time the interview publishes, Cross's window for intimidation will be closed. The story will be too big to suppress. And if he comes after us anyway? Then we fight him in court with everything we've documented. We expose him. We make him regret ever approaching your daughter. Serena's voice was hard. Taurus. Serena's voice. I told you before, I'm tired of watching people like him win. This is where we draw the line. They spent the rest of the evening preparing for the interview, organizing Ethan's father's research notes, pulling together photographs, documenting the timeline from auction to authentication. The work was meticulous and exhausting, but it gave Ethan something to focus on besides the knot of fear in his chest every time he thought about Lily. Around midnight, his phone rang. Rachel's number. She's safe, Rachel said before Ethan could ask. At the farm. Kids are all asleep. Tom's parents have a border collie who's apparently Lily's new best friend. Thank you. I don't know how to... You don't need to thank me. Just finish whatever you're doing and get her back home. Rachel's voice was tired but warm. She keeps asking when you're coming to get her. Soon. Maybe a few more days. Go. Take the time you need, but Ethan, when this is over, you need to think about whether this life you're building is the one you want Lily growing up in. The words hit harder than Ethan expected. After he hung up, he sat staring at his father's research notebook, at the decades of obsessive documentation, at the life that had been consumed by chasing something most people thought was impossible. You okay? Serena asked quietly. Rachel's right. I'm doing to Lily what my father did to me, making her grow up in the middle of someone else's obsession. Your father's obsession gave you something to believe in, something worth fighting for. It also made me feel like I was always competing with a ghost for his attention. I don't want Lily to grow up feeling that way. Ako much sides. Serena set down the papers she'd been reviewing. Then don't let her. When this is over, you'll have $300,000 and a story that proved your father right. Use that to build something stable, something that's just yours and Lily's, with no ghosts attached. What about you? What are you going to build? I don't know yet, but I think I'm done working for auction houses that treat history like inventory. Serena's expression was thoughtful. Maybe I'll go back to architecture. Maybe I'll do something completely different. But whatever it is, it's going to be something I actually believe in instead of something I'm just good at. They worked until 2 in the morning, until Ethan's eyes were burning and his head felt stuffed with cotton. Serena offered to let him crash at her apartment in Manhattan, but he declined. The garage felt safer somehow, even empty, like staying close to where the car had been meant, staying connected to his father's dream. He slept fitfully on the cot in his office, dreaming about rust-covered frames and spray-painted warnings, and his daughter running through a field he couldn't quite reach. The New York Times offices were exactly as Ethan imagined. Glass and steel and serious-looking people moving with purpose through hallways that smelled like coffee and ambition. The journalist who interviewed him was younger than Ethan expected, maybe 30, with sharp eyes and a recording device that she placed carefully between them on the conference room table. Her name was Jennifer Park, and she started with the easiest question. Tell me about your father. Ethan talked for 2 hours. He talked about swap meets and late nights in the garage, about a man who believed in something nobody else could see, about research notebooks and rumors and a prototype that had disappeared before Ethan was born. He talked about the auction, about seeing the triangular mark beneath decades of rust, about betting everything on a hunch that could have been wrong. Jennifer Park listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes but mostly just letting him talk. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You know people are going to call you lucky, she said. They're going to say you stumbled onto this by accident. Maybe they're right, but you don't think so. No. I think my father spent 40 years teaching me how to see things other people miss. And I think that's a skill, not luck. Ethan met her gaze. Luck is random. This was deliberate. Jennifer Park smiled slightly. That's a good line. I'm definitely using that. The interview wrapped up around noon. As Ethan was leaving, Jennifer Park called after him. One more question, off the record. Why did you sell the car to Damian Cross instead of taking it to auction yourself? Ethan thought about all the reasons he couldn't say. The threats, the fear, the desperate need to protect Lily from something he'd started but couldn't control. Then he thought about what his father might have said. Because the car wasn't what mattered. The truth was what mattered. And sometimes you have to give up the prize to make sure the story gets told. Jennifer Park studied him for a long moment. That's either very wise or very naive. Probably both. He left the building and found Serena waiting outside, leaning against her car with sunglasses on and an expression that suggested she'd been fielding phone calls the entire time he was inside. How'd it go? She asked. I think I talked too much. Good. This story deserves too much. Serena checked her phone. Dr. Webb's report went viral overnight. AutoWeek's article has 200,000 views already. Every major automotive collector forum is arguing about whether the authentication is legitimate. And Cross hasn't said a word publicly, which means he's scrambling. Any more threats? Okay. Nothing direct. But his lawyer sent me a letter demanding I cease all business dealings related to the vehicle and threatening litigation if I don't comply. Standard intimidation tactics. Are you going to comply? Not even a little bit. Serena smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested she'd been waiting her whole career for a fight like this. Let him sue. I've got better lawyers. They drove back to Brooklyn, and somewhere during that drive, Ethan realized he wasn't afraid anymore. Cross could threaten him, sue him, try to destroy his reputation. But the story was out there now. His father's research was validated, and Lily was safe on a farm 2 hours away where nobody was looking for her. The money in his account was real. The story in the New York Times would be real tomorrow. And for the first time since he'd walked into that Manhattan auction house, Ethan felt like maybe he'd actually won something. 2 weeks later, Ethan stood in Rachel's driveway in Connecticut, watching Lily play with Emma and the border collie whose name was apparently Captain. The sun was setting behind the house, painting everything in shades of gold and orange that made the whole scene look like something from a movie about better days. The New York Times article had published 4 days earlier. By the weekend, it had been picked up by national news outlets, automotive magazines, and 3 different podcasts dedicated to automotive history. Victor Crane's name was everywhere, and so was Ethan's. The phone calls had been overwhelming, collectors wanting to know more, journalists requesting interviews, people claiming they had information about Apex racing technologies that might help piece together what really happened. Cross had gone silent completely. No more threats, no more offers. Just radio silence from a man who'd built his reputation on operating invisibly and now found himself at the center of a story he couldn't control. Dr. Webb's DNA analysis had come back earlier that week with results that made everything even more complicated. The blood found in the car belonged to someone named Marcus Thorne, a junior engineer who'd worked for Apex Racing Technologies and who disappeared the same week the company collapsed. His death certificate, filed 3 months later, listed cause of death as automobile accident, location undisclosed. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they created was ugly. The racing scandal that had destroyed Apex wasn't about safety violations or corporate fraud. It was about covering up Marcus Thorne's death during an unauthorized test drive that went wrong. Someone had made sure that car, and the evidence it carried, disappeared completely, and Victor Crane had either helped or been forced to stay quiet. Ethan had shared all of it with Jennifer Park. It would be part of her follow-up article next week. "You did it, you know," Serena said, walking up beside him. She'd driven up to Connecticut that morning, ostensibly to discuss legal strategies, but really just to see how he was handling everything. "You proved your father was right. You exposed a cover-up. You got rich enough to stop worrying about shoes. That's the definition of winning." "Doesn't feel like winning," Ethan said. "Why not?" "Because my father should be here for this. He should be the one doing interviews and seeing his name in newspapers, and finally getting validation for 40 years of work. Instead, I'm just the guy who happened to find what he spent his life looking for. You're not just the guy who found it. You're the guy who refused to walk away even when someone threatened your daughter to make you stop." Serena's voice was gentle but firm. "Your father taught you how to see what other people missed. You taught yourself how to fight for it. Those are different skills, and they're both important." Lily ran over, breathless and muddy, with Captain jumping around her feet. "Daddy, can we stay one more night? Rachel said we could make pancakes for breakfast." Ethan crouched down to her level. "We've been here 2 weeks, baby. I think it's time to go home. But I like it here. Emma's teaching me how to ride bikes, and Captain lets me brush him, and I know you like it here. But we have our own home that's missing you." Ethan brushed dirt off her cheek. "And I need to get back to work so I can keep paying for things like food and electricity. Can Emma and Captain visit us in Brooklyn? Maybe someday." Lily seemed to accept this, gave Serena a surprisingly fierce hug, then ran back to play for what she clearly hoped would be several more hours. "She's resilient," Serena observed. "She has to be. Her father keeps making decisions that turn their lives upside down." Ethan stood up slowly, watching Lily throw a stick for Captain to chase. "I'm going to use some of the money to expand the shop. Hire someone to help with the work, so I'm not pulling 16-hour days anymore. Actually be present for her instead of just existing in the same space." "That's good. That's really good. What about you? What's next?" Serena was quiet for a moment, watching the sun continue its descent. "I quit my job at Vandermeer yesterday." "What?" "Told them I was done authenticating their inventory and playing middleman between rich people and their toys. They didn't take it well." Serena smiled slightly. "But honestly, it felt incredible." "Oh, so what are you going to do?" "What?" "I'm thinking about starting a small consulting firm. Help people authenticate historical vehicles, connect them with researchers, make sure important automotive history doesn't get lost or buried by collectors who just want trophies." Serena glanced at him. "Maybe partner with mechanics who know how to see what other people miss." Ethan felt something warm move through his chest. That sounds like the kind of work that doesn't pay very well. Probably not, but it sounds like work that actually matters. Yeah, it does. They stood in comfortable silence while Lily played and the sun painted everything gold. And somewhere in that moment, Ethan realized that his father's 40-year search hadn't been wasted after all. It had led here, to this evening, this daughter, this woman who'd risked her career because someone needed to care about truth more than commission. Thank you, Ethan said quietly, for everything, for stopping the auction, for fronting the authentication costs, for protecting Lily. I wouldn't have made it through this without you. Yes, you would have. You're stubborn enough. Serena's expression softened. But I'm glad I was here for it anyway. It reminded me that I used to be stubborn too,